Greetings, welcome to the Pan-African Leadership Center. This is a part of the series where we engage in discussions around the African world about issues that are pertinent to African humanity. We are honored today to have with us Sister Uluru Toyin, all the way in Germany. She is one who makes magic happen in that space to elevate African consciousness. She is a Yoruba practitioner. She's an artist, an educator, a community organizer, and a founding member of the Black Community Coalition of Justice and Self-Defense, a social justice organization that has been founded after around the issue of Black life being snuffed out by global white terrorism. Her topics involve understanding and elevating the voices of African individuals and groups who are marginalized and are excluded through forms of systemic violence, such as neo-colonialism, racism, and sexism. She is a certified psychosocial counselor, a psycho-spiritual healer. She's one who looks deeply into the soul and essence of being to elevate consciousness. She's also a founding member of Arivati, the Aggie Ajit Prop Performance Collective, and they use art as a tool of resistance and the illumination of African essence. Her topics involve understanding, again, the voices of those that have been marginalized and moving past neocolonialism and sexism and racism and elevating consciousness. Sister Oluretonya, thank you for joining us for this topic of global systemic terrorism of African people in Germany and Europe. We are familiar in the U.S. with the terrorism that has taken place for George Floyd and Breonna Taylor. And we're familiar with Sandra Bland and Philando Castile. These elements of terrorism we know about. However, the African world often does not become aware or well versed in what is happening globally. And so you bring to our attention that this is not an issue that is relegated to either the U.S. or to the U.K., but there's something that happens in Eurasia and all over the space where you find African people. So thank you so much. You can briefly tell people more about the work that you do, because your work is very dynamic. And then I want to go into this conversation around global systemic terrorism that you speak about.
Thank you so much for the invitation here to speak. I would like to start rightfully, as you said. Often when we think of terrorism against Black people, it has become very much to the forefront. It's everywhere to be seen that what happened to George Floyd. But this is not only limited to the United States. It's a global problem. If we want to say terrorism is this unlawful violence to eliminate African lives to the advantage, with political advantage to certain groups, this is why I would say systemic terrorism. And one of the tools of this form of terrorism is racism. The racism which has been structured, which has been put into place for generations from our continent itself, all over the globe. So you have that the first aspect is that people are not even aware. It is so normal. It is so abnormal and embedded in the educational system that when we look on the TVs here and you see people drowning, African and Black people drowning in their quest to seek asylum, it seems normal. So this is one of the unfortunate things, and actually this is where my work regarding terrorism, global terrorism on Black life started. In that I was teaching basic German language course, and I had suddenly a lot of students who explained to me how they have crossed the Mediterranean Sea on a rubber boat to get to Europe, explaining to me the things that they went through. And this is where, from the humanitarian part, from the aspect of being a human being, I could not understand how such things can go on in a so-called civilized world. So the first part of my work, which I do in Germany, is working with these groups of people, those who have been forced to migrate, those who have been forced to seek asylum and arriving here in Europe and living under precarious situations where they have been illegalized, where they have been dehumanized and even criminalized, and having to find a way to survive. So we have a lot of refugees who have died, asylum seekers, because they are not recognized as refugees. So despite the fact that people are forced to flee due to the inequality, due to the situations in their home countries, due to the exploitation which is going on there, due to the wars, due to the weapons that are being produced here in Europe and sent over there, people are forced to flee. And this is how my work started. And I would also continue that apart from that, the situation of refugees here, we also have the situation of Black people being targeted. So what was going on in the States as a lynching is also taking place here, in that there is no regard for Black lives. So you have, for example, the police as one of the instruments of white supremacy, feel they have a right to attack Black people, and they are not being held accountable. So this, later I can talk more on the case of Uri Jallo, is an example of a brother who was unlawfully arrested, taken to a police cell, and beaten, killed, and burnt beyond recognition. Until today, it's 17 years, there is still no accountability nor justice.
Since
We have also, yes.
since you started going there, right? Pause for a moment, and we're going to back up, but just pause and tell this story, and then we go into unpack what you said about racism and systemic terror. Uri Jallo.
Okay, so Uri Jallo was a young African asylum seeker, and he had come to Germany from Sierra Leone seeking asylum. At the time when he was arrested, he had gone out with his friends, and he had spoken. He had, according to the reports, he had spoken to a couple of women and asked them if he could use their handy. Somehow he had either lost his handy or he didn't have one. Speaking to the German white women, they called the police. And the police came, they realized he was drunk, and we don't know exactly why, but they took him to the police station. Meanwhile, his friends had been, wondering where he was, looking for him, and didn't find him. They then got an information from the police that he had been there, and he had somehow died apparently suicide. That he was burnt beyond recognition did not really was not really mentioned. But at the service which they had done, they were ready to release the body and even pay for it to be repatriated to Sierra Leone. Friends wanted to see the body, and this is how eventually they discovered that the body had been burnt beyond recognition. Uri Jallo was shackled, both hands and feet, on a mattress in the police cell. Until today, there has been no justice. And the question still is clear that he could not have burnt himself, having been shackled on both hands and feet. A private initiative, the Initiative in Remembrance of Uri Jallo, made up of friends and also activists, have been working on this case now for 17 years. So 17 years, there is always a demonstration in Dessau Rosslau where he was killed and burnt. Now, there have been several court cases with the results not being understandable. So some have said that the police have been found guilty of negligence in one instance, but they have never really been charged and found guilty of murder. So this is like just a brief summary of the case. The initiative has had several experts has done several expert investigations. The latest one was there was fire experts from England coming in and reconstructing what could have happened. So they built the cell exactly as it was, and they also created a body with raw meat and had that set on fire and watched what kind of burning, combustion would take place under these circumstances. And again, it proves that he could not have burnt himself, and there had to have been aiding agents to create such a fire. So this is roughly like the case of Uri Jallo.
So what you described is the same thing that we hear about in the U.S. and other places. We hear about the lynching, the castration, the maiming, the mangling. We hear about the recasting of the narrative to suggest that it was something self-inflicted. That's what was said about Senator Blaine and other people. So we hear these series of behaviors, and you mentioned racism as the culprit. We want to submit here that racism is indeed a mental disorder if we have an opportunity to define it for ourselves, and that it is psychologically disruptive. Some say if you give it a disorder, then it could be a mental ailment and it could be treated. But we want to say that it is a form of instability in consciousness because it is the idea that one group is better than the other. Now, it becomes normalized. This is something you said very early on. This behavior becomes normalized among those who engage in such behavior. And so then it becomes a normative way of engaging the world. And so they have identified what Marimba Ani talks about, Dr. Ani talks about the cultural other. They've identified the cultural other, and then they go out and attack it.
Exactly.
Let's be clear that this is not something, and you're making it very, very plain to us, that it's not something that is relegated to one space at one time, but it is an attack on the African world. It is amazing that we see the consistent behaviors as the attack on the African world. At the same time, the African world is seeking to find ways to become more amenable to that which is seeking to destroy it. That too is some level of psychological instability. You mentioned about the rubber boat and escaping something, but you said that the challenge is that there are weapons sold or brought to the African world and contributing to certain wars because people are fighting for resources, which is again a part of this idea of global terrorism. And
Mm.
then this creates a condition of unrest in the space, and people begin to leave the space, but not identify really what's causing the problem. I love how you stated that. That was very eloquent. Now let's look at that. Let's unpack this idea of when you say systemic. What do you mean by systemic? And what is it that we can conceptualize addressing in this systemic notion of global terrorism?
Okay, when I say systemic, I mean that there are certain practices and attitudes that are part of the system. They have been embedded in this to perpetuate the system of racism. That means that we all know that the history of racism was basically one of profit. Yeah. So the racism itself is a matter of power and privilege. And this has become very, very clear that this system, this origin or this roots of advantage was already established prior to slavery and has been maintained. So you see that in all, when you look at all the institutions, from the education, from medicine, you have that the racist ideology has been embedded there. That is, it is taken as that which is the norm, that which is used is the Eurocentric way. It elevates one culture and degrades the other. It elevates one knowledge and degrades the other. And this is really part of the problem, that the institutions have been established with racism embedded in their organizations. And the way you can notice it is different. We're not talking. We're talking about criminal justice area, when you employment, housing, healthcare, culture, even religion, spirituality. So this is part of the problem that you see, and we're not. It doesn't have to be something which is personal and intentional, but it is something which really is there in the system, in the structure.
So,
And this is what,
systemic, it's important to catch what you said, right? Systemic means that it runs through every aspect of social engagement or political engagement. So you mentioned in the educational system, there is
yes,
an agenda to promote the ideology of European superiority. In education, I mean, in medicine, there is an agenda to promote the idea of the superiority of the European physiology. In law, there is an imperative, an agenda to criminalize African humanity. So we see that in all of these systems that operate, they are antithetical to African existence. And so they, as you said, run on the ideology of European superiority, which then by default has this idea of African inferiority. Uh, what do you think about this when when African people and this idea of Africans being humane and Ubuntu, the idea of Africans showing compassion that somehow uh, many of us throughout the African world, whether we're in the United States or in Germany or in other space, believe that we're going to love these individuals in a way. We're going to show them what it means to be human. We're going to do some things and they're going to change their ways. What do you think about that? Is it possible to have African humanity love these people so that they don't demonstrate this behavior on a global scale like this?
That will not be the solution. The solution is the system which we're talking about is so inhuman. In fact, you can call it demonic. And when you look at it, at something which is totally contrary to what it means to be human, you cannot respond with loving attitudes. By doing that, we continue to reaffirm this behavior. We continue to reaffirm these crimes that are taking place. So what we as Africans people need to do is to first of all realize that we are also affected by this system, in that we deal with the internalized racisms ourselves. And sometimes this idea to show love might be coming from that. But there is a certain instinct, natural instinct of protection, because people want to live and people want to be safe. So the natural thing is first to protect yourself and the people. And we do this by loving ourselves and reflecting and healing from these internalized racisms which affect us, because we are socialized in the system. And as we love ourselves and take care of ourselves and realize that actually we do not need the other, we are in a place of power. We are in a place where we are able to find solutions to our own problems and not being dependent on a system that continues to brutalize us.
So this is where we're going to end up. We're going to end up where you are right now. We're going to end up with some solutions, right? What we can do, and we're going to get there in a moment. We want to. I like again this idea that you say that we're not going to love them. Our humanity can also be our greatest nemesis, or that which causes us more pain and destruction, because we think that somehow by being humane towards that which is inhumane, that we're going to make it more humane. And in reality, there is another step that has to take place, and it begins with self-love. So you know about and you are aware of then these series of behaviors that have taken place against African humanity around the world. You know about, you talk about Yahya Jabi. You talk about the medical murders of Tanu
Tony Bobda.
right, and Achida John and Koku Adze, right?
Yeah.
Tell us about this work and how you've come to the awareness of Jacqueline Nadler and racial profiling and the refugees or the immigrants around the world. How did you come to this, and tell us about these cases, and which case should we really be paying attention to, or issue, and how can we as an African world begin to address this? So tell us more about Yahya Jabi and others.
Okay, so these are cases here in Germany. I wasn't involved in the case of Yahya Jabi, but he was a refugee, an asylum seeker from the group Lampedusa in Hamburg, and I knew him personally. I was working also in the coordination of the movement, of the Lampedusa in Hamburg movement. These are war refugees who had to leave or were forced to leave Libya after Gaddafi was overthrown. And they were, in fact, most of them were pushed onto boats by the Libyans who were having racist sentiments. And when Gaddafi had fallen, they were like, oh, these refugees had been there working as guest workers, and they were pushed onto the boats. They couldn't return back to their home countries as there was a war and the passage was blocked. Then they arrived in Italy, Lampedusa, where they were in a program in refugee camps for about 2 years. And after the funds ran out, they were sent out again onto the streets. And a group came to Hamburg to try to find asylum there. And during the course, they were able to organize themselves as a movement and demanding their right to stay. And Yahya Jabi was also one of them with his brother. And apparently he had been arrested by the police, taken to the police cell. He was in constant communication with his family, his brother, and suddenly the news came that he had committed suicide. And this was something which was not possible. How somebody who was actually, he had lawyers, he was about to come out, would commit suicide. So this is often some of the ways that the killings work. People are said to have killed themselves, and there is no clarification. In the case of Brother Tonu Umbobda, he had gone into the psychiatry. He wasn't feeling well, and he had developed allergic reactions to the medication he was given. So he stopped. The hospital was trying to force him to keep using it, and he had refused, which is a legal right. He has the right to refuse medication. He went outside in front of the hospital and sat down, smoking a cigarette with the other patients on the hospital grounds. And then the security officials were called in. They threw him on the ground. Eyewitnesses claim he was, kicked in the knees, kicked in the back. They sat on top of him, and this is how he died. He was, however, taken to the intensive station and kept on life support for another 5 days before the death was then established. Sister Jacqueline had called us because at the time the corona lockdown started here in Germany. She was celebrating the birthday of her 16-year-old son. And the police came into the apartment. A racist neighbor had called them and said she was having a party. And when they came, she said, "I'm not having a party, we're just here family. It's my son's birthday." They were very rude. They took her with them, put something over her head, took her to the police station, made her strip naked in front of the male and female officers. Her hand was twisted and broken. And these are some of the things. The children were traumatized. The husband who had tried to say, "Oh, please, can we talk? Don't take my wife." His foot was broken. And these are the cases, and always you have a victim perpetrator reversal. So then it's the victims are then claimed to have been very aggressive, or they have self-inflicted injuries, which is not possible. Both Sister Jacqueline and her husband had to have major surgery, and there's no way that these injuries are self-inflicted.
Victim perpetrator reversal, right? Saying that the say define that. I don't want to jump on that one. Define that victim
Okay,
perpetrator
the
reversal.
victim perpetrator reversal is, I would say, a tactic, a strategy used often by institutions, in that rather than acknowledging that they have harmed a person, the victim is then made guilty. So, like you have, they say that Uri Jallo, he burnt himself, or they say that Sister Jacqueline attacked the police. And it goes even further sometimes that they start to fabricate even stories. So you might have that they say she wants attention, public attention, or they say Uri Jallo was a drug dealer. That means the victim is then further harmed by being criminalized and made guilty.
So the same thing happened. What happens all over, right? This
Right.
when we are guilty until found further guilty, right? So there's no
Mm-hmm.
issue of innocent until proven guilty.
No,
But
no.
what you mentioned is this victim perpetrator reversal. And Dr. Bobby Wright talks about the psychopathic racial disorder. It is where a
Yes.
psychopath has no remorse for their behaviors against other people, humanity of other people, and oftentimes will find ways to justify it. If we were to use their system of diagnosis, we could then suggest that in under their system of diagnosis that this is a manifestation of a
Mm-hmm.
psychopathic personality disorder, because it is one in which one inflicts pain upon others and then suggests that they cause this pain. Or you even said something about they committed suicide, they brought it on themselves. The reality is that because they kept talking, or because they existed, they created the condition by which they were killed. But I didn't kill them,
Mm-hmm.
they killed themselves because they existed, right? So that is a clear indicator of a psycho. Dr. Barbara Wright was very clear when he said a psychopathic personality disorder, and it becomes a part of a group. You're saying that it is not just in one location, it runs throughout the world where you find these people. They do the same thing and that's why you talk about systemic, is that it is woven into the fabric of their being. So it is woven into their rituals, and so they know the languaging of this particular behavior. But rather than take ownership and say, I did something like this, it becomes victim perpetrator reversal. In the
Exactly.
US, when African women were raped on the plantation, they were not raped because black women, African women were hypersexual. They brought it on themselves. And even if an African woman in America brought to the awareness of the courts that this had taken place, it was suggested that she actually, the white male could go to court and say, she made me do this to her, right? Which is again the victim perpetrator reversal syndrome that you speak of. That how could,
Exactly.
and they say that it's her fault because she is hypersexual. When we talk about the George Floyd, it was always trying to find something in his character that created the condition of that. But there is nothing to justify anyone putting their knee on someone's neck in public
Mm.
view for that amount of time until death. And also, they use the same narrative of suicide, the same narrative of burning. They burn themselves, the same narrative of somehow something happened that created a self inflicted wound.
Mm-hmm.
and it is a part of the psyche of that population. And so you've brought us to a level of awareness of the global issues. Are there any other ones that we should be aware of as we begin to move into, and what do we do about it? Any more situations or cases that we should be aware of globally?
Yeah. These are the main cases. We have also like women who have been killed. The case of Kristen Schwundeck, who had gone to her ex-husband and wanted to have the children, and the police came and just shot her down because she was aggressive. You see? So this is also an ongoing problem, you know, that women or young people are shot or killed and they claim self-defense. Yeah, it's claimed to be self-defense. We're going to put out these cases because definitely what is important is that we realize that we have to have our own collective response as a people. And I think this is also this we saw this happening with Judge Floyd, with the case of Judge Floyd. And this is something we have to continue to, and why what we're doing, what the Pan-African leadership is so fantastic, Black Mental Health Matters, that is, we have to be aware and informed what is happening to our people everywhere so that we can respond collectively, strongly. This is very important. This is very important. And regarding the reversal, we have to also watch ourselves because sometimes it's so painful to accept that somebody can be killed or harmed without doing anything. Because when we accept that point, we realize that it can happen to us anytime, and none of us is safe. And this is the kind of dissonance which leads to us asking. So when we tell our brothers and sisters something happened, somebody was killed, you often hear sometimes, he must have done something. When you hear somebody was raped, or maybe she was provocative. So even this type of reaction is also internalized in us, and we have to be aware of it.
You are correct when you say that suggest that we have all also internalized our own inferiority, right? A function of European superiority is that African inferiority is there, and rather than deal with the issues, we want to deal with one another. We want to say that we cause the problems. Yes,
Yeah,
we do know that we have some faults within us. However, these behaviors, as they are perpetrated all over, cannot possibly be simply a function of Africans being wrong. This person says that the system is trying each of us, but the idea was to he said that what I thought was very pointed here was to unity of all Africans throughout. And so I think it's really good to hear that there's a support for exactly what you said. Another person said that basically brainwash the Black folks. And so brainwashing is a part of it, right? The idea of if you can tell somebody long enough that there is a situation by which they are inferior, they will begin to believe that if you can tell a lie long enough, it will become the
you
truth. And
start to
so we
shoot.
have internalized our African inferiority. But now we're at a moment where we are changing our consciousness yet again. And this is we want to send out kudos to or we want to celebrate our brother Daniel Mabuno for pulling us together in this idea, United States of Africa, this Pan-African leadership center that he conceptualized. I am honored to be a part of it, and he's saying let's come together as a voice. I may challenge the idea of USA, United States of Africa, but I will suggest that to come together as a united front is essential. Someone commented about the victim perpetrator reversal, switching up the narrative of what actually happened, guilty and proven guilty. That somehow
This is
they are
what takes place.
understanding the construct. Now, what do we do, right? How do we respond? And you said that early on that we need to respond by having this self love. African people, at some level, suffer from not having self love. By buying into European superiority, we by default create this condition of suicide because we do not honor the genius that is within us. How do we begin to address this issue of self-love of African people? What do we do?
Well, with that, I would say we start as African people, we start always collectively, realizing that we are connected with each other. And the spirituality is important. We are connected to creation. We are connected to our ancestors. Then we move on to organizing. We need to build our own structures. And even if we start in little ways, community service, knowing who are the Black people around where you live, and forming yourselves forming a support structure to take care of each other. This is already a first step. Building ourselves, educating ourselves. It's so important to not rely on the system to educate us, nor to educate our children. So we have to build these alternative schools, which was already successful in the United States. We had that in the UK. We have that Saturday supplementary schools, and this is very important. The education is so important.
So we have to take control of the curriculum. The curriculum in schools must articulate something about African genius and brilliance. We must, and I think that is where we begin to get this self-love. We must also analyze critically that which is coming against us. Somehow we are not seeing clearly what is there. We are seeing what we want to see. It is a relationship that often happens among people when where they see what they want to see, but not see what is actually there.
There.
If a person or if a group are continually engaging in the behaviors of murdering, lynching, castrating, of dominating, of oppressing a population by means of violence, and it's happening in Germany, and it's happening in the UK, and it's happening in the United States, and it's happening everywhere you find them, then we have to be clear that the behaviors that are engaged in are not a fault of African people, but is a psychological condition of those that are exhibiting the behavior. If one examines closely the particular behaviors of European populations, you will see that they have mastered one thing very well, and that is the killing of other people. Because, as a matter of fact, in the US, they measure history by wars. So the history in this country, and when we go to learn history lessons, we learn the lesson from the Revolutionary War. To a civil war, to a World War One, to a World War Two, a Korean War, a
Yeah.
Vietnam War. We learn history by virtue of war. And if anybody understands civilizations, no one ever builds anything during a time of war. It is about destruction. If
Destruction.
if we examine how the British treated the Irish, we see that they oppressed, they mastered killing. If we understand even the dog called the pit bull, and how the Highlander and the Lowlanders were fighting and they used their dogs to do their bidding and fighting for them, and yet Michael Vick in the United States becomes victimized and demonized from doing exactly what they have been doing for years, we can clearly see that this behavior is a part of who they are. So we have to analyze clearly what are their series of behaviors and why is it systemic. It is systemic because it is a part of how they
They
normalize the
function.
world. That thinking, exactly right. And why is it that we are always taken by it? Because it is a part of our space to be accommodating. But you said something that was very important. There comes a point in time where an organism, whether it is an amoeba, whether it is a small dog or chihuahua, it begins to find ways to protect itself against that which is aggressing against it.
Mm-hmm.
So we are not forming that particular inoculation. I believe the inoculation, as you mentioned, comes in the form of education. What kind of content do you think would need to be included in a curriculum? And you're doing this work already, that would begin to infuse within a population self-love, African self-love.
Well, when we're talking, the important thing, you mentioned it already, there's so many ways and methods with which the past is distorted. So we're talking of history. We're talking of knowing ourselves, our personal history, and knowing the history of our people. Because when they keep narrating their own history, and we go to school and learn that, there will always be a disconnect. There will always be the lacking of knowing who we are. So this is a very important part, that history, our history, what happened in the past, how do we deal with the past, what are the reflections, and this is part of the reason why Western society is not really progressing. The progress, yes, maybe material things are built, but if you look at how they develop as human beings, you would see that it's actually moving backwards. So this history is very important, and it's simple ways. Even if it's just telling the history orally first in our families to our children, and moving on and having our own books, our own schools where our history is told. And actually, our history, it's the world history, because nothing would exist
Without
without Africans
Right.
and
And
Africa.
so I ask the question all the time. If you go around a room, identify five things that Europeans have created that makes this world better. And my students have a difficult time identifying two things. But when we go around the room, we can find several things in one room alone that the African genius has brought to the forefront. As a matter of fact, the coltan or tetralyte within the computers that we're using was primarily mined in the Congo. The technology of the internet was invented by Egmale. The idea of the cell phone came from Samson. So we have a plethora of inventions or creations that Africans have put out in the world that makes the world better. But we are hard pressed to find the things that make the world better coming from Europeans, and yet we buy into this idea that we are somehow inferior.
Inferior,
You
yeah.
say the first thing that we must do is that we must come together as a collective. We must understand who we are collectively. We must share these narratives, and these narratives, I think, of violence of purpose, because I had no idea. I was not aware of these until you started sharing them with me, and even more that you shared today. that they're happening globally. We need to join organizations like the one that Daniel has spearheaded to come together and have a voice. We must have these types of panel discussions where we invite people in to come in and discuss these and to share with the world. We must take the content that even we have heard today and share it with others. We must share this information. We also must tell our story of African humanity. Not that it is perfect, because it is filled with flaws, but it is not horrific. It is not tragic. It is one of greatness. The fact that I'm able to talk to Sister Olarun Toyin in Germany, and she speaks German, and she's speaking to us in English, but she also knows a plethora of other languages. And when we go to we were in the Gambia together, Sister. You know that when we went various places, it was nothing for a child to speak in 5 different languages in Jola and Wolof and
Wolof.
Manika. It was nothing for them to talk to one another in those various languages, which speaks to the high order cognition of a population, right? Because the only way that you can learn a language and learn several languages and learn the idioms in those languages is that you have a high level of cognitive abilities. And so Europeans only stress learning one language. And so I'm conversant and not even well according to the standards of Europeans in English, but our people are aware of being verbal in a variety of languages. That's something to celebrate. So we must talk about our history. We must talk about people. We must come together and form unions. You, as a healer, talk about your psychosocial work of African humanity. Talk about that. Share that with us. Uh, what do you do, and how can people get in touch with you to support you around the work that you do?
Thank you. As a psychosocial counselor, um, as opposed to psychiatry, I come from a point that based on the social environment, the well-being, the health of the body and the mind are also affected. I have tried to put in also an African-centered approach in that I add to it that the spirit is also very important. The connection to spirit, the connection to our ancestors are also important. So if I have a client who believes in ancestral work, then that is also part of the counseling, part of the healing process. I've had a lot of clients who come and they say when they were in the psychologist or to the psychiatrist, they are actually rebuked for believing in God. So they have the psychologist saying, laughing at them, you know, forcing them to take medication and these type of things, where to the point that a patient is killed because he refuses to take medication to which he's allergic, as in the case of Brother Tonumbobda. The main thing about my work is I believe that each client has the power and the ability to find a solution to their problems and to find the path to well-being and healing. So my work is more of a guide and opening the path. I use a lot of talk therapy, asking questions that will motivate the client to know themselves, because this is often the root of the problem, in that we do get disconnected from who we are. So if a client has undergone such traumatic events, like being in a boat that has capsized in the Mediterranean Sea, if they have been in Sierra Leone and have experienced the brutalities of war, if they have experienced the trauma of a forced female genital cutting, they still have a resilience within them and within our people to overcome. But it starts with knowing yourself, knowing when do you get worse? What might help you feel a bit better? How do you take care of yourself despite this experience? So it's a lot of exploring, doing internal work with the clients, and they eventually find their solution. Even if it means they say, okay, I would like to go into the psychiatric for a week, or I'm not uh, I'm not pushing clients not to go for psychiatric treatment, or they have the power to know what is good for their healing process. And sometimes, if the client wants, we can do work such as how do I honor my ancestors? Which blood flows through my veins? How do I tap into that power of my grandmother who loved me so much? Her love is still available to you. So these are some of the ways that we go about looking into, and all these different aspects: the spiritual, the financial, the relationships, the job. They all play a role in how we feel well and how healthy we are mentally, and of course taking care of the physical body as well.
Which is very important, right? The physical body, that's what Supreme Melanoidis says about the mind, body, and spirit. When we talk about African-centered healing and African-centered work, it is grounded in the notion that all things are spirit, seen as spirit, and that we're just spirit beings learning to be human. And so we talk about this repair, this disruption that we speak of, even when people said, "Wow, this is amazing." This is unfortunate. It is a disruption or a stressor or a trauma to the spirit and our psyche. The body didn't feel anything, but the internal being did. And so when we talk about people being marginalized and being traumatized in certain spaces, it is a spiritual piece for African centered healers. And so this is what you talk about. And so we are joining together. You and I, you've put out the call that we should do this institute, and so we will continue to
Mhm.
develop this institute of African-centered healing. We will place, of course, in it the Ubuntu work and everything that you're doing.
Exactly.
Melanoidis says that trauma can only be healed by through spiritual liberation. That is, her belief is that through spiritual liberation, that is how it is done, and that she also acknowledges that there must be a recognition of the ancestors. And so Dr. Fukiao reminds us that we are a seed of a seed of a
Of the
seed
seed.
of a
Of the
seed
seed.
of the seed. And so
And
within us is eternal life. Yes, ma'am.
just to mention, simple thing, like how we have in our traditional African culture, the arts, the music, the singing, the drumming. It's not entertainment. It's functional and also healing tools.
Yes.
Yeah, so these are things that we also incorporate and have also a big effect in healing.
Thank you for reminding me, because that's what I do, right? You brought it back. I actually do engage in using drumming as a modality for healing and restoration, but we know that it is already used as such, and we must break away from the European ways of functioning, because, as has been talked about today, the European process is one of promoting pathology. How can people contact you, sister, before we close out here? How can people contact you and communicate with you even further?
Okay. Bestest email would be Sister Oloruntoyin at black bmhm.com. And otherwise, Black Community Hamburg or Black Coalition Justice and Self-Defense. We are on Facebook, and yes, that's best to contact me.
So that was Sister Olarun Toyin
Yes.
at
B.
bmhm.com.
Yes. Yes.
Okay, I think I got that. Put that up. Um, and share more about, again, the work that you're doing with women, birthing, and so forth and so on, bringing life into the world. I know you're doing that work also.
Yes. So we have a lot of women here who do not speak the language and have to go into hospitals here. Sometimes you can imagine now in the period of Corona, those who do not have access to, who have been illegalized, who have been refused a legal status, had to leave places where they were staying. Cases of women who are in a violent relationship are particularly impacted now when there is a lockdown and everybody is at home, you know. So the work we do is ranges from trying to find accommodation for the women, trying to get them access into the healthcare system. So sometimes we do have to get them private insurance, health insurance, and so often we try to get them into the system so they can at least have basic healthcare needs. So when the women have to birth and go into hospitals and they do not speak the language, this is a very almost a traumatic experience. And so this is where I do accompany the women, go into the hospitals with them, and take care of them before the birth and also during the birth. So this is more like using, like I said, whatever resources she has within her. If she's very religious, then we go together, we pray together. If she wants to talk, if she has questions, we do that kind of work. I do relaxation work with the women so that they are, by the time that we go into the birthing theater, she is really feeling loved and embraced. Because it's really very difficult to give birth in such a violent society. To give birth in a place where you know you are not welcome. And so my presence there is one of creating that space, that an awareness that the child is welcome. You are welcome and you are okay as you are.
So,
Creating that space.
wow. So a child comes into a space in in Germany that is African, and they are affirmed from the very beginning. Thank you so much for that. Thank you for being a part of this discussion. What we have heard and what we have been exposed to is a knowledge into understanding African humanity. We've also started off with talking about the global nature of terrorism that and Sister Olarun Tuyen talks about global systemic terrorism. It is terrorism that is meted out against African people by virtue of European terrorists, psychologically and physically assaulting the African being. The challenge for us is to move beyond the terroristic thinking and move beyond the contaminated thought that Africans are inferior and operate from a position of understanding that there is greatness within us and that we have no business playing second class citizens in the world, that we are first world, first class people. Without the African genius, much of what is in the world would not exist. We often remind us of one another that The tea that is sipped today in the UK came from Madagascar and other parts of Africa. So the Queen's tea is not Earl Grey, but it is tea that has come from Africa. The crown on the head, the jewels and the gold primarily came from the continent. And so the richness and wealth of the world is within the people. The issue is that we don't believe ourselves to be rich and wealthy. The notion of attacking that which is great is a function of getting it to feel tarnished and that the others can profit from their greatness. But it is time to reclaim our own internal greatness and recognize that the reason that you attack me is because I am great and I'm wonderful. The reason why you keep attacking is because you have not won and you can't figure out why. And the reason why is because you can never kill that which you never destroyed, and that which is supreme will never be taken under by that which is inferior. So I thank everyone for listening and being a part of this discussion and continue to share this and to be a part of the United States of Africa. Thank you, our leader, Daniel Mabona, for pulling this together. And we just celebrate in the greatness of who we are. Thank you, sister, for being a beacon of hope and light for our people. And thank you for sharing. And we will connect and communicate really soon. Peace and blessings.
Peace and blessings. Thank you.